Hey guys, what's up? I'm Jake, 32 years old, and I work as a data analyst at a financial firm in New York. My job involves dealing with all kinds of reports and data every day. And to be honest, it can get pretty boring sometimes. So after work, my biggest hobby is curling up on the couch, sipping a beer, and catching up on international news, especially about India. This country, which is always shouting on social media about India's rise and surpassing China and catching up to the US, always manages to deliver unexpected surprises, or rather, sometimes, shocks. I don't know if you've come across a recent news story. In February 2026, India's Central Statistical Office suddenly released data claiming that India's nominal GDP for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year reached 357.14 trillion rupees, roughly $4.23 trillion when converted to US dollars. Surprisingly, this surpassed Japan's $4.21 trillion for the same period, propelling India to become the world's third largest economy. As soon as the news broke, India went into a frenzy. Mainstream media was flooded with reports proclaiming the arrival of the Indian century and the Modi government's miracle, while social media was ablaze with jubilant posts from Indian netizens. Some even launched the hashtag celebrating India becoming the world's third largest economy, and Prime Minister Modi himself mentioned it in a public speech, calling it a significant milestone in India's rise. To be honest, when I first saw this news, I nearly spilled the beer I was holding, not out of shock, but because it seemed so absurd. As someone who deals with data on a daily basis, I know all too well the caliber of India's statistical system. I'd heard many times before that their data was inflated, but I never imagined they'd dare to pull such a stunt with an indicator as crucial as GDP. I immediately bet my colleague that the data was definitely flawed and that they'd have to backtrack within a week. Guess what? I won. Just 1 week later, on February 28th, India's Central Statistical Office quietly released revised figures, slashing the previously announced 357.14 trillion rupees down to 345.47 trillion rupees, roughly $4.01 trillion in USD terms, a full 5% lower than Japan's GDP for the same period. A grand surpassing Japan celebration instantly turned into a global farce. Not only did India lose face, but more importantly, international confidence in India's economic data plummeted to rock bottom, triggering a severe crisis of trust. Let's first sort out the ins and outs of this incident. On February 22nd, 2026, India's Central Statistical Office, CSO, officially released preliminary GDP data for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, claiming that India's nominal GDP reached 357.14 trillion rupees. Calculated using the average exchange rate for the 2025-2026 fiscal year, one United States dollar approximately equals 84.4 rupees. This amounts to approximately $4.23 trillion. According to data released by Japan's Cabinet Office during the same period, Japan's nominal GDP for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year was approximately $4.21 trillion. This means that India's GDP has surpassed Japan's, making it the world's third largest economy, trailing only the United States and China. The news sent India into a frenzy. In front of government buildings in New Delhi, people celebrated by holding signs reading "Long Live India" and "Number 3 in the world." At the Bombay Stock Exchange, stock prices surged, with investors cheering that India's economy has entered a golden age. India's mainstream media, such as the Times of India and The Hindu, featured front-page headlines proclaiming India surpasses Japan to become the world's third largest economy. They even highlighted the achievements of the Modi government, claiming this was a major success of Modi's Make in India and Digital India policies and a defining moment in India's rise. Even more outrageous was that some Indian politicians seized the opportunity to fan the flames, claiming that India has shaken off poverty and backwardness and is poised to become a global economic leader. And that it won't be long before India surpasses China and even catches up to the United States. When I came across these remarks on social media, I found them truly laughable. Not because I look down on India, but because India's economic strength simply cannot support such exaggerations. Just think about it. As a financial analyst, I regularly monitor economic data from many countries. While India's GDP growth rate has long been touted as the fastest in the world, industry insiders are well aware of just how much of that figure is inflated. Moreover, India's per capita GDP is less than $2,500, not even 1/10 of the US figure, and even lower than that of some Southeast Asian nations. How could a country like this suddenly surpass Japan to become the world's third largest economy? Japan's per capita GDP exceeds $35,000, and its industrial base, technological capabilities, and infrastructure are far superior to India's. For India to surpass Japan, it would take at least several decades. How could this possibly happen overnight? So, I concluded right then that there must be something wrong with these figures. Either the calculation method was flawed, or the Indian government had deliberately fabricated the data. Sure enough, a week later, the Central Statistical Office of India released revised figures, lowering the GDP by 11.67 trillion rupees, equivalent to $220 billion. And suddenly, the narrative shifted from surpassing Japan to 5% lower than Japan. Moreover, the reason they gave for the revision was even more unacceptable. A discrepancy in data calculation caused by a base year adjustment. At this point, some of you might be wondering, what exactly is a base year adjustment? Let me explain it in simple terms. The base year is like the base figure we use to calculate wage increases. For example, if my salary last year was $80,000 and this year it's $90,000, then the base year is last year and my wage increase is 12.5%. But if I suddenly change the base year to this year, my wage increase becomes 0%. Simply put, adjusting the base year directly affects the calculated GDP. Different base years can result in significant discrepancies in the GDP figures. The issue with India this time is that when releasing the preliminary data, they quietly changed the base year for GDP calculations from the Arlene E. Shurar fiscal year, which had been used for the past 15 years, to the Arlene R.R. Arthen fiscal year. Moreover, when releasing the preliminary data, they made no mention of this change whatsoever, nor did they explain how the base year adjustment would affect the figures. Instead, they simply released the adjusted inflated data with the sole purpose of creating the illusion of rapid economic growth to curry favor with voters and boost the Modi administration's approval ratings. Such a maneuver would be absolutely unthinkable in the United States, although our US statistical system is not without controversy. For instance, last year, the US Department of Labor revised downward the number of new jobs created in the year ending in March by 818,000, effectively cutting it by nearly a third, prompting Trump to accuse the Biden administration of manipulating employment data. Even so, when our statistical agencies release data, they clearly explain the calculation methods, base year, and potential biases. They would absolutely never, as India has done, deliberately conceal the fact of a base year adjustment and use inflated figures to mislead the public and the international community. Moreover, India's recent base year adjustment involved not only changing the base year, but also modifying the calculation methods. For instance, they adopted a more granular price deflator and expanded the basket of goods from the original 180 items to 500 to 600 items, incorporating both the Consumer Price Index, CPI, and the Wholesale Price Index, WPI. The justification provided is to more accurately reflect changes in India's economic structure, particularly the development of emerging industries such as digital services and renewable energy. But in reality, the core purpose of these adjustments is to inflate GDP figures. For example, India employs a very lenient methodology when calculating the output of the digital economy and financial services sectors, even including projects that have not yet generated actual revenue in GDP calculations, which leads to a severe overestimation of output in these two sectors. Furthermore, in calculating agricultural output, India uses the method of production volume multiplied by the official support price rather than actual market transaction prices. It is important to note that official support prices are often significantly higher than market prices, which results in agricultural output being substantially overestimated as well. What is even more baffling is that India's statistical methodology is severely inconsistent with international standards. According to internationally accepted statistical standards, GDP calculations should encompass all economic activities, including both the formal and informal sectors. India's informal economy accounts for over 40% of GDP. However, due to difficulties in data collection, this segment is often underestimated or omitted. Yet, when calculating GDP, India not only fails to adequately account for this sector, but also puffs up the figures for the formal economy. How can GDP data calculated in this manner possibly be accurate? Beyond issues with calculation methods and statistical definitions, a more serious problem is the clear suspicion of government interference in India's statistical data. Since the Modi administration took office, India's statistical agencies have consistently been accused of being manipulated by the government. The release of statistical data often serves to cater to the government's political propaganda needs, rather than being based on objective facts. Let me give you a few examples. In 2021, the Indian government postponed the census, marking the first time since 1951 that India had broken with the tradition of conducting a census every 10 years. At the time, there was widespread speculation that the government delayed the census out of concern that the population data would expose issues such as poverty and unemployment in India, thereby damaging the Modi administration's image. In Arlene Arsene, several senior officials at the Central Statistical Office resigned due to disagreements over data processing methods, believing the government was interfering with the data, a move that further intensified public concerns about the authenticity of India's statistics. In the recent GDP blender, an anonymous official from India's Statistical Department revealed to the media that the release of the preliminary data was under pressure from the government, aimed at supporting the Modi administration's political propaganda and creating the illusion of India's rise. The revision of the data, however, was an adjustment made under pressure from international organizations and the academic community. Put simply, this is a farce of data fabrication orchestrated by the Indian government, which has sacrificed data integrity for political gain, deceiving both the public and the international community. As someone who deals with data on a daily basis, I truly cannot comprehend such practices. The core value of data lies in objectively and truthfully reflecting reality. Whether it's statistical agencies in the United States, Japan, or China, though their calculation methods may differ, they all adhere to the bottom line of objectivity and truth, and will never deliberately fabricate data for political gain. They all understand that once the credibility of data is lost, it is extremely difficult to restore. And the credibility of data is directly linked to a nation's international image, the inflow of foreign investment, and the economic development of the entire country. The Indian government clearly failed to recognize this. They believed that, by relying on inflated GDP figures, they could create the illusion of India's rise, win the support of voters, and elevate India's international standing. But they did not anticipate that this farce would ultimately trigger a severe crisis of confidence, dealing a heavy blow to India's economic development. Next, let's discuss exactly what impact this crisis of confidence has had on India. First and foremost, the most immediate consequence was that international rating agencies downgraded India's credit rating outlook. In early March, the two major international rating agencies, Fitch and S&P, successively changed India's credit rating outlook from stable to negative, citing significant doubts regarding the credibility of India's economic data, which increases investment risks. Although Moody's did not downgrade India's credit rating, it issued a statement expressing concerns about the transparency and independence of India's statistical system, and revised India's economic outlook from positive to cautious. Some of you may not realize just how important credit ratings are for a country. A country's credit rating directly determines its borrowing costs in international markets. The higher the rating, the lower the costs. The lower the rating, the higher the costs. The downgrade of India's credit rating outlook means that the cost of issuing sovereign bonds and raising funds in international markets will rise significantly. According to the Indian Ministry of Finance's own estimates, interest expenses on sovereign bonds alone will increase by approximately $2 billion annually. For India, which is already facing foreign exchange pressures, this is undoubtedly adding insult to injury. Second, foreign capital inflows have dropped significantly. Data shows that in March 2026, foreign direct investment, FDI, inflows into India totaled only $2.8 billion, a 15% year-on-year decline. This marks the largest monthly drop in foreign capital inflows since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. As we all know, India's economic development is highly dependent on foreign investment, particularly in sectors such as technology and manufacturing, where such inflows serve as a key driver of economic growth. This GDP blunder has caused international investors to completely lose trust in India's economic data. Many of my friends in the investment industry were originally considering whether to increase their investments in India. After all, top U.S. venture capital firm General Catalyst had previously announced plans to invest $5 billion in India over the next 5 years, leading many to believe that India might become the next hotspot for investment. But once this blunder came to light, everyone changed their minds. They have been postponing or canceling their investment plans in India and redirecting their capital to other emerging markets such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and Brazil. In addition to foreign direct investment, foreign institutional investors, FIEs, on the Indian Stock Exchange also net sold $1.2 billion worth of Indian stocks in March, causing the Indian stock market to plummet. The Sensex and Nifty indices fell by 3.2% and 3.5% respectively. The share prices of many Indian domestic companies were also affected, with their market capitalizations shrinking significantly. Underlying this was investors' loss of confidence in India's economic data, as they feared the actual economic conditions were far worse than the figures suggested, and worried their investments might be completely wiped out. More broadly, this crisis of confidence has also severely damaged India's image on the international stage. For a long time, India has sought to project an image of high growth and global South leader, seeking greater influence in global economic governance and even aspiring to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. However, this GDP fiasco has revealed India's true colors to the international community. How can a country that fabricates even basic economic data possibly be a leader of the global economy? How can anyone trust its economic policies and development plans? At the G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting held in March 2026, some of the economic policy proposals put forward by India were met with a cold reception from other nations. Representatives from many countries openly stated, "We cannot take India's economic policy proposals seriously until the credibility of its data improves." For India, which has long sought to elevate its international standing, this was undoubtedly a severe blow, placing the country in an awkward position on the global economic stage. Moreover, this crisis of confidence will spill over into India's domestic economy. Due to reduced foreign investment inflows, many Indian enterprises, especially small and medium-sized businesses, are facing capital shortages, unable to expand production, and even at risk of bankruptcy. Sectors such as energy and chemicals, which require substantial foreign investment, are also facing severe constraints on their development. At the same time, the data fabrication scandal has eroded public trust in the government. Many citizens are beginning to question whether the economic growth and improvements in people's livelihoods previously promised by the Modi administration are genuine, placing significant pressure on the government's governance. At this point, some of you might be wondering, why has India encountered such problems? Why is their statistical system so dysfunctional that it cannot even produce accurate GDP figures? In fact, this GDP blunder is not an isolated incident, but rather a concentrated eruption of long-standing issues within India's statistical system. These problems did not arise overnight, but are the result of years of accumulation, primarily centered on three aspects: insufficient funding, brain drain, and political bias. First, let's address the issue of insufficient funding. The annual budget for India's statistical agencies accounts for only 0.03% of GDP, far below the international average of Bevanja Lingding, and even lower than that of some African nations. Can you imagine a department responsible for compiling and analyzing the nation's economic data functioning effectively with such a meager budget? This funding shortage directly results in India's statistical agencies lacking the necessary technical equipment and human resources. For example, India's national sample surveys cover only about 1% of households, far below the international standard of 5%. This severely compromises the representativeness of the survey results. Much of the data is estimated based on a small sample size, making accuracy impossible to guarantee. Furthermore, India's statistical agencies lack advanced data collection and processing technologies. Much of the data is still compiled and entered manually, which is not only inefficient, but also prone to errors. Even more outrageous is that due to insufficient budgets, the salaries of Indian statisticians are extremely low, often failing to even cover basic living expenses. In India, a senior statistician's monthly salary is roughly only $500, which is significantly lower than that of IT engineers, doctors, or lawyers, and even falls short of what some ordinary office workers earn. Such compensation is simply insufficient to attract and retain high-quality statistical talent. Many outstanding statistics graduates would rather work as data analysts in the private sector than join government statistical agencies. Second, there is the issue of brain drain. As I mentioned earlier, due to low pay, poor working conditions, and limited career prospects, many talented statisticians have chosen to leave India's government statistical agencies. According to statistics, since 2014, more than 30% of senior statisticians at India's Central Bureau of Statistics have resigned. Most of them have joined international organizations, such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, or taken positions as data analysts and economic researchers at multinational corporations in the United States and Europe. This brain drain has led to a steady decline in the professional capabilities of India's statistical system. Currently, many staff members in India's statistical departments are inexperienced novices. Some have not even received professional statistical training and are unable to master even basic statistical methods and data processing techniques. It is simply a pipe dream for such a team to calculate accurate and objective GDP. Data. Furthermore, the brain drain has prevented India's statistical methods from being updated in a timely manner, leaving them at a relatively backward level. This makes it impossible to meet the needs of economic development, particularly the accurate accounting of emerging industries such as the digital economy and renewable energy. Finally, and most fundamentally, there is the issue of the politicization of India's statistical system. Although India's statistical agencies are nominally independent, in reality they are subject to tight government control and lack true autonomy. The Director General of the Central Bureau of Statistics is appointed by the government for a term of only 2 years. This forces the head of the statistical agency to cater to the government's political demands. Otherwise, they risk being dismissed prematurely. Furthermore, the Indian government indirectly interferes with the release of statistical data by controlling the agency's budget and personnel authority. For example, in Arlene Arwul, the Indian government cited budget constraints to cut funding allocated to the Central Bureau of Statistics for updating in a one-year delay in the base year update. At the time, there was widespread speculation that the government did this to manipulate data to align with the Modi administration's political propaganda. More seriously, India's statistical data lacks transparency. The calculation methods and sources for much of the data are not made public, making it impossible for the public and the academic community to monitor or evaluate the data's accuracy. For instance, in the recent GDP blunder, the Central Bureau of Statistics only reluctantly explained the base year adjustment issue when releasing the revised data, but still did not disclose the specific details of the calculations, further exacerbating external distrust in India's data. In fact, as a working professional in the United States, I am well aware that our statistical system is not perfect either, and it's subject to some controversy. For instance, there have been downward revisions to employment data, as well as disputes over the methodology used to calculate the CPI. Some critics argue that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics deliberately lowers calculated inflation rates by adjusting the weightings of goods in the CPI basket. Yet even so, our U.S. statistical system possesses three advantages that India cannot match. First, strong independence. Statistical agencies are free from government interference and can release data objectively and truthfully. Second, high transparency. The calculation methods and sources of all data are available on official websites, subject to scrutiny by the public and the academic community. Third, adequate funding. The Statistics Department's budget accounts for 0.15% of GDP, enabling it to acquire advanced technical equipment and attract and retain highly qualified talent. To help you better understand the issues with India's statistical system, I'll provide a comparison of the statistical systems in Japan, the US, and China, and show just how significant the gap is compared to India's. First, let's discuss Japan's statistical system. Japan's statistical system is characterized by institutional continuity and sample representativeness as its core strengths. The Household Income and Expenditure Survey, the Living Conditions Survey, and the Consumer Price Index form a three-pronged framework that establishes a stable, long-term tracking structure. Japan's GDP accounting strictly adheres to international standards, with the base year updated every 5 years. Moreover, the update process is fully transparent. The public can access detailed calculation methods and data sources through the official website, with no information withheld. More importantly, Japan's statistical agencies enjoy a high degree of independence and are free from government interference. The Statistical Department reports directly to the cabinet, and its heads serve relatively long terms, ensuring the continuity and objectivity of statistical work. This prevents changes in data calculation methods or release schedules due to government transitions or shifting political demands. Furthermore, Japan's statistical budget is very substantial, accounting for 0.12% of GDP, far higher than India's 0.03%. This enables Japan to conduct comprehensive data collection and processing, ensuring the accuracy and completeness of its data. Next is the U.S. statistical system. The U.S. statistical system is a prime example of a decentralized statistical system with multiple government departments and agencies jointly responsible for statistical work. For instance, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, within the Department of Commerce is responsible for GDP accounting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, handles employment and price data, and the Census Bureau handles population statistics, among other responsibilities. The advantage of this decentralized system lies in the high level of specialization within each agency, which enables the provision of high-quality statistical data, while also avoiding the risk of government interference that can result from excessive centralization of power. Our U.S. statistical system is highly transparent. The calculation methods and sources of all data can be verified through official websites. The public and the academic community can monitor and evaluate the data, raising questions and offering suggestions. Furthermore, our statistical agencies enjoy a high degree of independence. Although they are managed by government departments, they are free from government interference regarding data releases, enabling them to publish data objectively and impartially without intentionally fabricating figures for political gain. Furthermore, our statistical budget is very substantial, accounting for 0.15% of GDP. This allows us to adopt advanced technologies and methods for data collection and processing, maintaining the statistical system's leading position. Next is China's statistical system. China's statistical system is a representative example of a centralized statistical system, with the National Bureau of Statistics uniformly responsible for national statistical work. Local governments establish corresponding statistical agencies that operate under the vertical leadership of the National Bureau of Statistics. The advantage of this centralized system lies in its ability to ensure data uniformity and comparability, avoiding data discrepancies among local governments and providing a comprehensive and accurate reflection of the nation's economic development. China's statistical system strictly adheres to international standards, using the System of National Accounts 2008, SNA 2008, jointly issued by 5 major international organizations, including the United Nations, as its accounting foundation. The base year is updated every 5 years to align with international standards. Although China's statistical agencies are managed by the government, they possess a degree of independence in data dissemination. The National Bureau of Statistics regularly releases statistical data, and the calculation methods and sources of the data are made public, subject to oversight by the public and the academic community. China's statistical budget is also continuously increasing, currently standing at approximately 0.08% of GDP, higher than India's 0.03%, which enables China to continuously enhance the capabilities of its statistical system and ensure the accuracy and reliability of its data. Comparing the statistical systems of these 3 countries, it is clear that India's statistical system lags significantly in multiple aspects. First, India's statistical system lacks independence and is subject to severe government interference, standing in stark contrast to the independence of statistical agencies in Japan, the United States, and China. Second, India's statistical budget is severely inadequate, amounting to only 500 Lingdaran Len, of GDP, far below the international average, making it impossible to conduct comprehensive data collection. And processing and rendering the accuracy and completeness of data difficult to guarantee. Third, India's statistical methods and definitions differ from international standards, resulting in a lack of data comparability and making it difficult for the international community to accurately assess India's economic performance. Fourth, India's statistical transparency is low. The calculation methods and sources of much of the data are not disclosed, further exacerbating external distrust of India's data. Finally, India suffers from a severe brain drain in the statistical sector, with insufficient professional capabilities to meet the needs of economic development and provide high-quality statistical data. As someone who frequently follows Indian current affairs, I actually hope that India can continue to develop for the better. After all, a stable and prosperous India would also benefit global economic development. However, if India continues to ignore the problems in its statistical system and relies on fabricated data to create the illusion of rise, it will not only fail to achieve genuine development, but will also face a more severe crisis of confidence and may even be marginalized by the international community. Therefore, in the face of serious issues in the statistical system and the ongoing escalation of the crisis of confidence, the Indian government must take urgent measures to implement reforms and rebuild the international community's trust in India's economic data. Drawing on the experiences of the statistical systems in the United States, Japan, and China, I believe India's reforms should focus on the following 5 areas. These are recommendations I offer as a data analyst. First, India needs to establish an independent statistical commission. This commission should consist of statistical experts, economists, representatives from academia, and members of civil society, operating independently of the government and free from government interference. The Commission's primary responsibilities would be to formulate statistical policies, oversee the work of statistical agencies, and to review the release of statistical data. Members of the Statistical Commission should be appointed through open and transparent procedures with terms long enough, such as 5 to 7 years, to ensure independence and stability, thereby preventing disruptions to statistical work caused by changes in government. Additionally, the Statistical Commission should regularly publish reports evaluating the performance of India's statistical system, proposing recommendations for improvement and ensuring the system's continuous refinement. Second, India needs to significantly increase the budget for its statistical system. I believe India should raise its statistical budget from the current 0.03% of GDP to at least the international average of 0.1%, or even benchmark against the United States' 0.15%, or Japan's 0.12%. The increased budget should primarily be allocated to 3 areas. First, improving the technical equipment of statistical agencies and introducing advanced data collection and processing technologies, such as big data and artificial intelligence, to enhance data accuracy and timeliness. Second, improving the compensation and benefits of statistical staff to attract and retain high-quality talent. Address the issue of brain drain and enable statistical personnel to work with peace of mind while enhancing their professional capabilities. Third, expanding the scope of data collection, particularly in the informal economy, by investing more human and material resources to ensure data completeness and representativeness, and to avoid omissions or underestimation. At the same time, the use of the budget should be subject to strict oversight to ensure that funds are used for the construction and development of the statistical system, rather than being misappropriated or wasted. Third, India needs to establish a review mechanism involving international experts. India should invite experts from international organizations such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the United Nations Statistics Division, to participate in the review and evaluation of India's statistical data. This would not only enhance the credibility of India's statistics and gain international recognition, but also help Indian statistical agencies learn from international best practices, improve statistical methods and technologies, and elevate the professional capabilities of the statistical system. International experts should regularly review India's statistical data, offer recommendations for improvement, and publish audit reports to the public to increase the transparency of the statistical system. Furthermore, India should strengthen cooperation with statistical agencies in other countries, such as those in the United States, Japan, and China, to participate in the formulation and promotion of international statistical standards, thereby increasing India's influence in the global statistical arena. Fourth, India needs to enhance the transparency of its statistical system. India should establish a unified statistical data platform to centrally publish all statistical data, making it convenient for the public and the academic community to access and utilize. Statistical agencies should also regularly hold press conferences and seminars to explain the implications and limitations of statistical data, thereby improving public understanding and awareness of such data and preventing the public from being misled by inaccurate information. Furthermore, India should disclose the calculation methods, sources, and review processes for all statistical data, allowing the public and the academic community to monitor and evaluate data accuracy, raise questions, and offer suggestions, fostering a positive cycle of interaction. Finally, India needs to strengthen the training and recruitment of statistical professionals. The country should establish more statistics programs in universities to cultivate high-quality statistical talent. At the same time, it should provide scholarships and training opportunities to encourage young people to pursue careers in statistics, thereby injecting new vitality into the statistical system. Furthermore, India should recruit top-tier international statistical talent to bolster the professional capabilities of its statistical agencies and enhance the overall expertise of the statistical system. At the same time, India should establish a mechanism for the exchange of statistical professionals, encouraging mobility among government, academia, and the private sector to promote the dissemination and application of statistical knowledge and elevate the professional standards of the entire industry. Of course, I am well aware that implementing these reform measures will not be easy. India's statistical system has been in a state of disrepair for many years, and the problems have become deeply entrenched. Moreover, the Modi administration may not be genuinely willing to undertake reforms, as reform would mean relinquishing control over statistical data and losing a tool for political propaganda, a development that would be detrimental to the Modi government's governance. However, if the Indian government continues to turn a blind eye to the problems within the statistical system and maintains the status quo, India will face an even more severe crisis of confidence. Foreign investment will continue to drain away. Its international standing will steadily decline, and economic development will face even greater obstacles. The so-called rise of India will become nothing more than a joke. The February 2026 blunder regarding India's GDP surpassing Japan, though embarrassing, has provided India with a crucial opportunity to reform its statistical system. If the Indian government can seize this opportunity, implement concrete and effective reform measures, and rebuild international trust in India's economic data, then this crisis could potentially become a new starting point for India's economic development. However, if the Indian government remains obstinate and continues to rely on falsified data to create the illusion of rise, India will ultimately pay a heavy price for its actions. Rebuilding trust requires time and effort. The Indian government should begin immediately to implement a series of concrete measures to gradually improve the state of its statistical system. First, India should immediately release a detailed plan for reforming its statistical system, clearly outlining the goals, steps, and timeline of the reform, thereby demonstrating its determination and sincerity to the public and the international community. Second, India should complete the establishment of a statistics commission and adjust its budget by the end of 2026 to provide institutional and financial safeguards for the reform of the statistical system. Third, India should establish an international exporter view mechanism by the first half of 2027 and invite international exports to conduct the first review of India's statistical data. Finally, India should complete the enhancement of statistical system transparency and the establishment of a statistical talent development system by the end of 2027 to ensure the long-term development of the statistical system. During the reform process, the Indian government should also closely monitor three key indicators to assess the effectiveness and progress of the reforms. The first indicator is the inflow of investment, including foreign direct investment and investments by foreign institutional investors. This is a crucial measure of the international community's confidence in India's economic data. If investment inflows gradually increase following the reforms, it indicates that international confidence in India's economic data is rising. Conversely, it suggests that the reforms are not yielding satisfactory results and that further adjustments to the reform measures are needed. The second indicator is the degree of technology transfer. Specifically, the extent to which Indian statistical agencies learn from and adopt advanced technologies and methodologies from international experts and statistical agencies in other countries. A high degree of technology transfer indicates that the professional capabilities of India's statistical system are improving, and data quality is expected to improve. Conversely, it suggests that Indian statistical agencies have shortcomings in terms of technological learning and innovation. The third indicator is the intensity of political reaction, which refers to the degree of intervention in statistical data by the government and political figures. If the intensity of political reaction decreases, it indicates that the independence of the statistical system is increasing, and the objectivity and impartiality of the data are being safeguarded. Conversely, It indicates that the problem of politicization within the statistical system remains severe, requiring more robust measures to resolve it. Having said that, I'd like to discuss with you what impact this has on the United States and on American investors. First, for American investors, this crisis of confidence in India is actually a warning sign. As an emerging market, India does possess certain investment potential. However, the unreliability of its statistical data, government interference, as well as issues such as lagging infrastructure and a complex legal system, all increase investment risks. Therefore, I recommend that American investors exercise extreme caution when considering investments in India. Do not be misled by the inflated figures released by the Indian government. Instead, conduct thorough research, assess investment risks, and avoid suffering losses due to India's statistical issues. Secondly, for the U.S. economy, India's crisis of confidence actually presents an opportunity. As foreign capital flows out of India, much of it will seek new investment destinations. The United States, as the world's largest economy, with its stable market, reliable statistics, and favorable investment environment, will undoubtedly become the top choice for these funds. This will help attract more foreign investment into the United States, driving our economic growth, particularly in sectors such as technology and manufacturing. The inflow of foreign capital can spur industrial upgrading and create more jobs, which is also a positive development for American workers. Furthermore, the issues with India's statistical system serve as a wake-up call for the United States. Although the U.S. statistical system is relatively well developed, it is not without its own controversies and issues, such as the previously mentioned downward revisions to employment data and disputes over CPI calculation methods. We should learn from India's experience to further strengthen the independence and transparency of the U.S. statistical system. Refined statistical methodologies ensure the objectivity and accuracy of data. Avoid a data fabrication farce similar to India's, and uphold the United States' credibility on the global economic stage. As a 30-something American office worker, I enjoy following Indian current affairs, not because I look down on India, but because I believe it is a nation rife with contradictions and controversies, possessing both immense development potential and numerous serious problems. I hope India will confront its issues head-on, adopt practical and effective measures to implement reforms, and achieve genuine economic development and rise, rather than relying on fabricated data to deceive itself and others. After all, a nation's true strength isn't inflated by false data, but built on tangible economic and technological prowess, improvements in people's livelihoods, and the recognition and trust of the international community. If India wants to become the world's third largest economy and realize the dream of India's rise, it must stay grounded, starting with fixing its statistical system. It needs to take steady, step-by-step progress to enhance its capabilities. Only then can it truly earn the respect and recognition of the international community. Well, that's all I have to say for today. From the blender of India's GDP surpassing Japan to the underlying issues with its statistical system, the impact of the trust crisis, reform suggestions, and the implications for the U.S. This has been a personal analysis and perspective from start to finish. I may not have covered everything comprehensively. So please feel free to share your thoughts and views in the comments section and join the discussion. What do you think? Regarding India's recent GDP blunder, deliberate fraud, or a genuine failure of statistical capabilities? Do you think the Indian government will genuinely reform its statistical system? If you were a US investor, would you still invest in India? Let me know your answers in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Next time, I'll chat with you about other current events in India, such as just how superficial India's Make in India initiative really is, the country's challenges with foreign investment, and the geopolitical games between India, the US, China, and Russia, among other topics. Finally, thank you for watching. I'm Jake, an American office worker who loves to talk about international current events. See you next time. Peace out.